Hello and welcome to episode 184 of our SAP on Azure video podcast. Today is March 18th, and together with Robert and Goran, we are here to talk about anything related to SAP and Microsoft. Hello, everyone.
Hi, guys.
So today is a quite special episode for me. For a very long time, when I was working at SAP, I was working alongside a very special colleague and friend. Vinayak Adkoli was my partner in crime for a lot of projects. In the last projects, we worked together on SAP API Management and simplifying the way how customers could manage SAP APIs. Then I moved to Microsoft, Vinayak moved to different teams, moved from India to the US. And today I have the pleasure of welcoming him in our podcast. Last week, we actually already talked with Martin Raepple and Christian Cohrs from SAP about Single Sign-On and Multifactor authentication in the context of SAP GUI. And today we want to focus on API-based authentications. Similar like with the SAP GUI, this is one of the most talked about scenarios. And I'm really glad to have Vinayak with us, who can provide us with some insights on how this is working. So without further ado, let's switch over to Vinayak. Vinayak, can you quickly introduce yourself? What do you do at SAP?
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having me, Holger, and a very good morning, good evening, good afternoon to where your listeners are based out of. And I mean, I cannot tell you how much of a deja vu moment this is for me, Holger. Personally having worked with you, and these were some of the topics that we exactly visited back then. So it's all kind of coming back to me. So I'm so happy that we're actually doing this podcast and then talking through some of these things that we have done. So I'm Vinayak Adkoli. I'm a PM in the Integration Suite team now, and been with SAP for a long time, I guess. Yeah, so 19 years running now. So it's really
cool.
great, right? And coincidentally, most of what I've done in my SAP term is actually around integration in some sense, right? So not integration in terms of PIP or XI, but then we've always looked at SAP from the lens of trying to integrate SAP with external providers, and integrating with Microsoft was actually a big part of what Holger and I did in our past life. So for me, it's kind of extending on the roots and the seeds that were set back then. So yeah, I'm just happy to sort of talk through today about API management, what we do with Integration Suite, and how do we enable and make it easy for customers to actually connect via APIs to their SAP and non-SAP system, and what actually we do with Azure AD, or Entra ID, as now we call it, is actually a big part of how this thing goes. So happy to be here, Holger.
Oh, perfect. Well, thank you so much. Maybe we can start by quickly talking about SAP API Management. SAP API Management is part of the business technology platform. It's part of the integration suite now, which I think is really nice. So if you are a customer of SAP Integration Suite, you can subscribe to API Management. And I think a lot of customers are using it in the meantime. So running it on BTP as a cloud-based service, using maybe the SAP Cloud Connector to connect to your on-premises system, and really, managing your APIs basically.
Absolutely, Holger. And then I think for us to sort of kick the tires running on this topic, it's important on where we come from. So as probably your listeners know, Integration Suite is SAP's integration platform as a service to help connect systems, applications, data, processes, events, and basically the entire gamut. And most of what we did back then was centered around SAP as kind of the core, right? So everything was centric on SAP systems. But now we know that heterogeneity is the name of the game, right? So we need to ensure that we are able to give a very seamless experience for customers across systems, across protocols. And that's when opening up via APIs is really a big part of really how we connect into these enterprises, right? So we have to be pervasive. We have to talk the language and vocabulary of APIs, and we need to, let's say, pay attention to things like security, single sign-on, and really because, and you know this, right? So enterprises and their applications don't really exist in isolation, right? So it's sort of always in a sort of an enterprise jungle. And take, for example, if you really have, let's say, a React.js or an Angular app that your
Mm-hmm.
customer is trying to build, using, for example, let's say the mstyle.js library,
Yep.
and what you would want to do as part of this use case. For example, if you wanted to pull, let's say, a product master data that were to come from SAP BTP as the extension platform. So the SDKs and then your code needs to be able to make that switch, right? So you need to ensure that the same user authentication, the context, the identity, the permissions, the scopes are sort of seamlessly relayed over to the SAP side as well, right? So that's really the challenge and the sweet spot that we help our customers, get into. And that's what API management is all about, right? So API management is in ensuring that customers are able to easily discover APIs and connect into them and publish them, ensure that not just their own customers front end, but also their partners, their entire ecosystem gets a very seamless and simplified experience. So that's when the topic of users and identity becomes extremely important, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Holger, this is not a new thing. This has always been there. Being able to connect, for example, Microsoft ADFS with
Yes.
NetWeaver has been sort of a done and dusted, an old thing. And we sort of ensure that when customers come to us with BTP, they sort of take forward and then they have a very simplified way of connecting the dots and then ensuring that the same context is available to them because we have BTP connectivity services, we have BTP destinations, right? So all of that matrix has to all come together. So that's really part of the evangelism and what we want to show as part of our product. Right, so that's basically, I think, the space that I wanted to cover in the next half an hour or so on this podcast, Holger. Um, with that, why don't I sort of jump into maybe explaining on what a typical landscape and how are our customers dealing with the situation? So let me share my screen.
Yeah, perfect. Because as you said, I think the having the combination, you have your SAP system, maybe running on Azure, and now you want to expose services to other applications, and that's where now you have an SAP API management in between. Yeah, exactly, and beautiful. So this is basically our starting point where we have now integration suite on BTP.
Right, exactly. And I'm going to walk through this sort of an example really quickly. And this is where you all start, right? So as a customer, you really want to log in and access resources on Integration Suite, or this could be any BTP service for that, right? So it could be
Mm-hmm.
Workzone, it could be probably your build code, your SAP build app, your business process automation studio app. So irrespective of what the BTP app is, and mostly this applies to browser-based apps, you want to ensure that you are able to sort of have the seamless connectivity. And let me grab my pointer here real quick. So the way how our customers have dealt with the situation, if you really start from the left, is that the sort of new thing is to always connect via SAML and OpenID Connect, right? So OpenID Connect is sort of the new extension that really promotes federation across identities. So within BTP, we sort of tell our customers to look at cloud identity services and open up the connectivity to OpenID Connect. So that's really the way to sort of onboard an identity provider like Entra ID.
Mm-hmm.
And we have this relay as a corporate identity provider, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what BTP or what IAS would do is to sort of act as a proxy and ensure that it is able to take the trust that has been established via your BTP cockpit and your identity providers. This is like again a configuration. You don't have to import SAML metadata, so that's actually one of the good things about OpenID Connect. So the discovery is quite seamless, and that's what we do. And again, like I said, this is not a new thing.
Yes.
Point-to-point connectivity between identity provider and the service provider has always existed, right? So our customers have actually done this using SAML bindings, right? But like I said, this is probably a thing of the past now. So the idea is to like really encourage customers to go via OpenID Connect. So that's really what we are doing now. And this is a typical user flow, right? So an end user would log in and then try to authenticate, and which is when then BTP would redirect these guys to identity services, which is then acting as a proxy, and then eventually a user would then provide his Entra ID credentials and then sort of get access to the resources. And things like now, permissions and group information will be translated as OAuth scopes. So that's another thing. And BTP in this case would understand the scopes and convert them to role collections and then eventually authorize the user for what he can do or cannot do. Right? So that's like a very simple construct of what it takes to really be logging into the design time services. I haven't spoken about APIs yet, which is probably what I will do next, but hopefully this establishes some imperatives to what it takes to be actually connecting. And I have a small demonstration over here. So let's discard. And so what I have over here is basically a demonstration where I will be logging in as an SAP employee into my BTP services, and then I'm actually going to be doing an SSO with our corporate IDP, which in this case is Azure anyway, right? So SAP has Azure as its corporate identity provider. And so if I start by probably taking you through my IAS tenant, again, it's pretty simple. You need to onboard yourself as an identity provider. And here in this case, I have one for Azure AD, Entra ID, and then you could actually one set up for B2C as well, right? So if that's the flavor of AD that you want. And the key here is to really select OpenID Connect as the binding. And what that would let you do is very easily onboard the sort of well-known configuration discovery URL. And once you've sort of given your application credentials, so all of that will flow through. And what I want to show you over here is basically some additional configurations which a customer can do. So if I just take you through the raw response, in this case, you see that I sort of am getting the group information as well. So that's an important element that I wanted to probably also focus. Group, where's my cursor? Yeah, you actually have that over here, right? So this group information is important because it can really relay the entire, let's say, director level permissions and not like doing onboarding every user, which is what enterprises want to do, right? And now on the Entra ID side, and here is where I'm logged into my directory, right? So I have a directory for myself. And what this will let me do is to basically inspect the app I've created. So I need to select the integration suite directory. Let's just do this. I think I'm already there. It's a refresh probably.
Multi-factor authentication, always very important. And actually, while you do this, especially this configuration with the identity authentication services, I just want to repeat, this is not something that is specific to the SAP API management scenario that we're talking about. For example, when Goran talked about the SAP GUI multi-factor authentication setup last week, where we talked about the SAP secure login service on SAP or on BTP and the new functionalities. One of the prerequisites there was as well to first set up the trust between the identity authentication service and do the federation to Entra ID. So this is basically the first initial setup, the initial trust that you need to do. And afterwards, once you have this, then you can easily explore these other single sign-on functionalities. And I can see, you're still
talk about single sign-on. I'm still trying to get my my token, so that's usually part of the demo story anyway. And hopefully, I should be in now.
It's realistic.
Yeah, and Goran, that's exactly the multi-factor authentication that you talked about last week.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Right. So let's quickly look at our app registration, and this is the app that I've actually created. So this is integration suite, and what I wanted to show is that as part of the the handshake, I've also included the groups attribute as well, right? Because I don't want, like I said, every user to be sort of onboarded. So I just wanted the group permissions happening. So that's what actually you will see as well. And then, so for a minute, if I go back to my groups, you'll see that there is a group called integration developers, right? So
Perfect.
obviously I've probably assigned a bunch of users over here, and those users will basically get the role permission on the BTP level, right? So that's the context first I wanted to switch. So with that, let me close this and go back. And how this looks on the BTP side is basically, again, in my sub account, I have the trust configurations. And what you see over here is basically, again, the IAS, which has been configured as the trusted identity provider, which means that federation is going to be happening from here. And with that, if I now try opening my instance of Integration Suite in a new browser tab as an incognito. So, and this is where, again, it sort of first asks me, because you remember I had multiple configurations. It's going to ask me. Ideally, I could do away with this as well. I could also onboard the SAML identity provider also as part of the federation ring. So that's something that I could have done. So let me sign in with my SAP
Entra ID credentials.
Exactly, right. So it's basically going to tell me that, look, there is your work account. So let me basically select my work account and back to our favorite dialog here. And once that happens, now the reason it's actually making me authenticate twice is because I have a custom directory, right? I obviously don't have permissions to SAP's default directory. So it's always going to basically double verify me, which I'm sure is something that we could deal with as well.
But it's important now. This was all a Microsoft authentication screen, so it clearly redirected you to Entra ID. That's where you provided your credentials, and now, as we can see in the URL, we are back on the BTP side.
Exactly, right. And here is where you see that now.
Perfect.
My application screen is loaded. And the last mile that I was actually talking about is probably again on now the role collection. So I actually need a role collection called integration suite roles. And what you have over here is, again, basically this one line item that says that from my identity provider, it actually checks if the OpenID Connect claim did have this group, right? And this was the group that I was actually mentioning. And because I'm part of this group, so there's no user assignment. And that's really the thing that our customers care for. So they don't want to be doing individual user assignments. They just want to be doing a group level assignment, and that should actually work. So this is really the demonstration there. So it's as simple as it gets.
Perfect.
And this is great because every admin you will never do per user, but actually per group, and then add, remove users from the group, right?
Absolutely. Definitely makes sense from an administration standpoint. All right. Now let's get into some of the more nuanced conversations. And here is where we sort of enter the domain of exposing an API using API management, right? So this is probably my, let's say my initial portion where you see that API management, I've exposed a proxy. And the thing over here is that, while we don't, so when you expose a BTP service, usually there is something called as XSUAA, right? So XSUAA deals with that authorization server. Now, the thing about API management is that it does not have bindings with XSUAA, which is a good or a bad thing, right? So depending on how you may want to see it, it's obviously a good thing because your end users can essentially land on the endpoint URL, and basically they can choose to present any token, any SAML assertion any certificate, and it's basically for the contract between, again, Entra ID and the API management runtime to have this sort of a understanding of how users will be authenticated, right? So that's actually that helps us, because otherwise you cannot have an unauthenticated or unregulated access into a BTP resource, right? But then API management sort of gives you this conduit, and you need to have this trust, right? And that's actually, we have, again, out of the box JOT policies, and you can go and verify and then inspect if really the token that is presented is actually valid or not, right? So that's the first handshake, or the first level of defense that API management enforces. And when it comes to now the handshake between API management and the backend, and of course, API management has, again, multiple connectivity options, and it's actually now a client, and then you want to do an MTLS, you want to do an OAuth, right? So depending on what the backend exposes, you could sort of layer that conversation between API management and the backend, and you could promote and propagate the user identifier as well, right? If that's really a thing, which I will talk about in my subsequent slides. And what, Holger, a lot of our customers do is to use this method to actually connect to cloud-based LOB systems, for example, SuccessFactors, right? So SuccessFactors needs a BTP destination. So what actually we've published as policy templates are ways in which you could codify the invocation to a BTP destination. If that's your thing, for example. So if you wanted to go via BTP destination, boom, apply this policy template, and then we sort of call the destination tokens endpoint, and then we ensure that the same identity can actually be passed. So this is something that we help our customers do. And this is, again, a very, very simple scenario. Where it gets...
Vinayak, very briefly, I also want to highlight that, for example, I think in a lot of cases, customers also only want to expose their APIs using an API key. That's the only way to authenticate. And then I don't need an access UAA to force additional authentication upon me. But the only thing that I need is maybe then this API key, which I can get from SAP API Management, and that's all that I need. So that's where this way SAP API Management provides me with a lot of flexibility on how I can actually expose my APIs and then also connect to my backend systems.
Absolutely, and I'm happy you made that point, Holger, because what we also then tell customers is that, look, API key is obviously something that BTP doesn't know. But what you could also do in API management is create certain custom attributes, as we call this application attributes, and then you could map these application attributes, which actually may contain the client ID and client secret of your BTP service key. And of course, you have the API key, which is from the API management authorization service. So that way, you could sort of correlate both as well.
Perfect.
Right? So again, if there is a challenge, we obviously help our customers overcome this, right? But I'm happy you made that point, right? So a lot of customers think that API management is actually using BTP service key. The answer is no, it's not, right? And again, like I said, it's a good thing and a bad thing, but definitely the correlation can be done. And where a lot of our customers really come to us is really this, because they want to talk to on-prem backends, right? So they have their S/4HANA systems, they have their ECC systems, which obviously goes via cloud connectivity services. Now, while the API proxies themselves are not bound to client credentials, we actually have a hidden component called OP proxy. And this OP proxy essentially will then expose client credentials. And this is something that then we can relay and then ensure that the connectivity that the BTP connectivity service needs can be established, right? So this is something that we do. And here is where we start this whole big, discussion on the fact that we need to now act as a trusted SAML identity provider, right? Because BTP supports what is called as, again, RFC 7522. And I know that Martin Raepple has a very nice blog on this, which is also part of my description over here. But we sort of force the API management piece to act as a SAML issuer, right? So when we do that, we sort of tell access UAA that, look, I'm the API gateway. I'm, in this case, the SAML issuer. Here is a certificate that I'm generating, right? Trust me. And then obviously we have the trust going, this is called as, again, onboarding IDP federation, right? IDP initiated metadata. And once you do that, you could sort of relay a SAML assertion, and then you would basically exchange the SAML assertion for a JOT token that eventually the connectivity service would need, right? So it's a little bit of a hop, Holger, and a lot of customers, they kind of get confused over here. We try to make it simple. So we have some policy templates, we have some blocks written over there, but this is always sort of a sticky spot on why do I need such a long drawn effort to actually get this handshake done? Can it be simplified? Yes, it can be simplified, but then at this point of time, this is probably my go-to approach when it comes to establishing this connectivity. Like I said, compare and contrast this with the approach that Martin Raepple talks about in his blog, which again, I'm a big fan of that approach as well, right? The only difference in that approach is that you have a direct trust between Entra ID and, in this case, BTP's XSUAA, right? So you sort of onboard this enterprise application, and then it has a reference to the open alias endpoints, from BTP, and this works as well, right? So I sort of, when I talk to customers, I always propose both these models, telling that, look, two options exist. It's now really up to you on what is it that you have a preference for. So again, they have to weigh in their pros and cons. So one of the biggest pro of this approach is that an identity provider is doing the job of exactly what it is supposed to do, right? Which is probably what most of the customers should be worried about. Because in this approach, you are sort of doubling up as an SAML issuer or an identity provider. So there is always this governance thing of, should I be creating users? How secure is this? So it needs sort of an elevated trust permission, which are again maybe part of the cons. But in full transparency, we need to tell our customers that both these options exist. And depending on what you have a fit for, go ahead and then set up this machinery for OAuth to SAML bearer handshake. So that's now exactly what we talk about, and that leads me to my next demonstration, Holger, where I actually will be presenting these two approaches. And I have this Postman collection that I've already prepared, where actually I'll be simulating this, right? Again, thanks to your colleague Martin Raepple, I'm actually using one of his Postman collections and just tweaking the scenario a little. So the first handshake that we want to simulate is basically that from Azure, where obviously there is a client applications, maybe like a Teams bot app, and we're simulating a user logon flow, right? So this is actually configured for authorization code grant type, and then I'm going to be signing in now. And once I sign in, so let's grab my code.
So this is basically, we're right now on the site that I start my application or whatever, where I need to authenticate with Entra ID. So this is the typical flow. I use my Microsoft credentials, username and password. You have set up here multi-factor authentication again. And now as a result, we should get a token back, right?
Exactly. And this is the access token. Again, nothing about BTP. So this obviously has maybe the email address and then all the authorizations and scopes that the app actually issued to this particular flow, right? And that's what we codify. Now, what I'm going to be doing in my next handshake is this. I have this API proxy now, right? Because what you want to be doing is to be presenting this token to the SAP side, and then you want to tell SAP that, look, first of all, go and check whether this token, is really, it's a valid token, and then it is issued by who it claims to be, right? So we actually do a JOT handshake over there. So we have a JWT verification policy, and it's pretty simple, right? So we grab the public key from Microsoft's service discovery endpoint, and then we go and check whether the certificate was actually issued by this or not. So that's the first handshake where we actually verify and validate the token. And let me just send this, and then this is doing a lot of things behind the scenes, right? So what it actually comes back is from an S4HANA system, and the S4HANA system is actually configured for X59 certificates, right? So this is what happened. Maybe it's just easier for me to put this on debug, right? So I'm just gonna refresh my session, and let's put a debug just so that we can see the entire sequencing of the handshake.
And then we can see the policy flow basically, or the flow running through the different policies, or the different steps in the policy that you have created.
Exactly, right. So I'm just starting my debug. And here is where I have my CAL system where S4HANA is running as well, right? So if I actually just want to go and grab my, yeah, I think I'm already logged in here, of course.
Yeah, so the flows, we have our app, which is now in our specific case Postman, basically, where you have the access token. Then we call SAP API Management. There we'll have the debug flow here, and then from here we'll call the SAP system, the S4HANA system.
Absolutely right. So I'm going to be sending, and then it comes back. So if I now again go to API Management and then refresh, basically see a whole lot of things happening over there, right? So just want to keep it very short over here. Like I said, the first important handshake is to really look at the token that came in from Entra and, sort of validate this and pull out the user email. And which is what you see. Okay. This is my signed in user. And what I'm going to do next as part of the second level of handshake is to generate a SAML assertion exactly for this, right? So I'm actually acting as a trusted identity provider now, and which is probably what you see. So I'm calling myself a SAML issuer. I give myself iSuite API gateway. Now you have the binding information. You have the SAML audience, and then the recipient set to basically what BTP has published them to be, and then I have the user email address as well, right? So I'm passing my name ID. And once I take the SAML token, and then what I do is I present the SAML token to XSUA's token endpoint, and I basically use a token exchange. And you see that this is the base64 encoded format of the SAML assertion. Grant type is actually SAML bearer. And then I have the client ID and client secret of the on-premise credential that I just mentioned. And XSUA is going to honor this, and then it's going to give me back now an access token. It's going to say, okay, fine, I trust you, right? So take this access token back. And this access token now, if we actually go and inspect this, this is going to have the role binding information from SAP, right? So again, it quantifies this is the client ID, says that this is the grant type that you came with, right? And the most important thing is to present the username, right? So this is the signed username from Microsoft, and it's actually going to present this to Cloud Connector, and then Cloud Connector is actually going to do its thing and then actually do a successful handshake, which is what you see over here, right? So within my Cloud Connector most recent request, you see that a request did come in for this particular user, and this request was able to actually extract the resource, and this resource on the so if I actually go to search rule and then the standard configuration, so you see that for the issuer that now Cloud Connector has actually been configured with, it's basically going to go and find the matching username, right? So on S01, I basically now have this username called sweet user, and what you would see is that he's actually annotated
with your email address. Yeah.
Right? So this is the way how even now ABAP's going to honor and then give you back that response, right? So this is again that flow. So like I said, this flow has been documented by Martin Raepple as well in a different flavor. And that's what our customers now, what they tell us is that, and if I actually can go back to my presentation. So what we sort of do is these couple of keywords over here, right? So API management facilitates the on behalf of SAML generation flow, right? And then API management will facilitate the exchange of the SAML to a bearer token, right? So again, API management is not acting as an identity provider. It's just acting as a facilitator, right?
Yes.
Because there are multiple sort of handshakes that need to happen. And that is something that now I have codified in my next API proxy, which I will give you a quick walkthrough of. So configure APIs. Let's basically go back to this. Yeah, I'm actually calling this E2E. And what this does, Holger, is that again it basically gets the token from Azure, and it's basically going to now call this intermediate proxy called SAML generation proxy. So I'm actually using proxy chaining within API management. So one proxy can actually chain into the other proxy, right? So this SAML generation proxy is now the proxy that actually is configured to negotiate on the OBO flow, right? So if I can go
Which
to
then
the
basically converts the access token from Entra ID into an access token from BTP, basically.
Exactly, right. And here is where you see that this is basically again set for the on behalf of flow, and it basically has the client ID, client secret that now basically again is representative of the Azure app, and this way essentially now you have the entire handshake going. So API management does a very lightweight role over here. It just acts as a facilitator because the bulk of the trust and the exchange work is between Entra ID and BTP XSUA directly.
Yeah.
So that's basically another flow that we talk about to our customers. And
Vinayak, before you go to the last scenario or to the next one, these policies that you showed us, are they published somewhere on GitHub so that customers can use them?
Yes. So so this policy that I just showed is not yet published. So I'll actually have to, I'll take that as a cue, and then maybe I'll have to get this out. But we do have a bunch of policy templates, and actually I can show how you can actually get there. So within the Business Accelerator Hub, so our customers would have to go and basically look for Business Technology Platform and navigate to the API sections, and you see now policy templates, right? So this has basically a bunch of policy templates that I just mentioned. So BTP connectivity and principal propagation via SAML. So you actually have a bunch of policy templates over here, and then this sort of applies both to the Neo as well as to the Cloud Foundry world as well, right? So this is the go-to place.
Perfect.
Now with that, let's basically go to the last segment, which is probably a little bit more easy to implement, but it's a very powerful one, right? Now, so what happens is that not all applications that we have on Azure, or that basically that Azure needs to contact, happens directly with API management, right? So you may actually have a scenario where you, for example, may want to contact any BTP service, right? Just think of a service where maybe Fiori app, for example, right? So there is a Fiori app that actually you're contacting, and now this Fiori app could actually be authenticated and signed into using the first set of primitives that I mentioned, right? And in the second handshake, the app over here can directly invoke a BTP destination to call API management, right? It doesn't need all those special policies and then handshakes, because BTP destination under the hood is exactly doing, what I codified in my policy template, right? So again, that's the reason why destinations are very powerful. It takes away the pain from a customer of actually doing this by himself. And it's very simple, right? So you just configure a destination, and then let me show you how the destination looks like in a minute. And eventually then API management would call the connectivity service and then go again to your on-prem system. So this is a very simple flow where customers don't need to write policies should they be coming in from an intermediate BTP application, right? So that's really the token exchange process there. And let's quickly look on how that looks like. So this is my BTP destination. So let me go to my base sub account. So I have a small Fiori app that I've written to demonstrate this. So let me first go and open up the instance of my business application studio. And let me go to my Europe 1 sub account and open BAS. And while that opens, if I give you a walkthrough of my destinations, you'll probably have now, I mean, I have a lot of destinations over here. So let's just see which one I'm using in my actual app. But the point over here is to really demonstrate that you could do the OAuth to jot bearer handshake, right? And what the Fiori app would do is, again, take the same BTP token that it got probably from Azure, using IIS, and then sort of convert it internally using the client ID and client secret primitives for API management, and then it would hand that over to API management, and then you sort of pass that entire thing all the way. So this makes things very simple. So let me start my dev space. I should have done this earlier.
No problem. I mean, now we have SAP Fiori in between, basically, and SAP Fiori would be the initial starting point where I connect, where I'm again prompted then for the authentication. And now the new thing is basically that I can take the token that I'm getting from this SAP Fiori authentication process and use that to connect to my destination service, right?
Absolutely. And then, I mean, Fiori app is just an example, but it could essentially could be any intermediate BTP app, So this is my sample project, right? So just a few clicks. I just use the out of the box Fiori generator to get this thing going. And what you see over here is basically this app sort of connects to this destination. And this is the destination that probably. So if I go to my manifest.json, so you see that the destination is S4 HANA on-premise, right? So that's the destination. So let's look at S4 HANA on-premise. And S4 HANA on-premise is set for OAuth to jot bearer, and then it actually has the connectivity credentials, right? So this is pretty much all that a customer needs to dial in. Now with that, let's quickly invoke this app. So I'm going to be starting this and then running this obviously within this browser context. So it already knows my user, my signed in user. And yeah, it's just going to start a process, and this is going to basically pick up the destination, right? And then it's actually invoking. So this should exactly simulate the same flow. So it goes to the API proxy. API proxy is just going to transparently pass the token that it received. And Yeah, so let's go and select business partner ID, name, and company name. Okay. And there you have it, right? So this comes, and maybe what we could do is to again go to our cloud connector, and you should probably have a new request that came in. Yeah, so this is now the request that actually comes in from my signed-in user, right? Because I log in from my user, and again, the same flow happens, and then it's actually able to contact the business partner set, which is a sample demonstration that I pulled in.
Fantastic.
So those are the different zoo of flows that I wanted to quickly rush through, right? And then it may seem easy, but then sometimes customers do have a hard time, and then they sort of engage with our COE colleagues, with our consulting. Sometimes they reach product management, and then we help them, get these things in order.
No, I think this is really fantastic because, as you said, in a lot of customers, or with a lot of customers, they have Entra ID or Azure Active Directory, where they used to do their primary authentication, and now they want to access APIs. And there are multiple ways, as you said. Maybe they want to access an SAP Fiori application first. Maybe they really just want to call the API, and maybe they want to have the authentication, the access token creation within the BTP, and then connect to the SAP system. And I think the beautiful thing is that there's choice. You can decide what fits best in your specific scenario. And yeah, I think that this was a beautiful overview of the different options that are available.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a good summary, Holger. So yeah, thanks for having me, and then actually, giving me the opportunity to walk you through all of these things. So it was definitely well worthy my time.
Thank you so much. I hope that you will publish the templates as well. This very specific Entra ID specific templates, not only the ones that we just saw, but yeah, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll have you again to talk about a few other topics that we're working on. But for now, I think this was a great starting point for the authentication. And yeah, again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, thanks for having me, and a very good evening to your viewers back home.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vinayak.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.